as you would slowly see, rather a blue planet. You will see only water. Then, in fact, the first living molecule started its journey from the vast ocean. And while we celebrate Earth Day, we need to understand that the entire climatic phenomena in the Earth is controlled by this vast body of water called ocean. We all began our journey from this vast ecosystem, the large marine ecosystem. We still carry part of the ocean in our body, in our cells, in the form of cytoplasm, which carry a lot of salt. So it's a tribute to those who love Earth and the living systems on Earth. And that could be one of the reasons why the famous science writer, or rather science fiction writer, Arthur C. Clarke, once remarked how inappropriate to call this planet Earth when it is clearly ocean. So I'll start with that. And when you look at the Indian culture as well, we can see that we are connected more with the ocean in our culture, in our history, because it's a cultural legacy as far as the ocean is concerned, as far as the fish in the ocean is concerned, which is considered as one of the avatars of Lord Vishnu. And then when we look at the whole history of the Indian civilization, especially the Indus Valley civilization, the latest study indicate that the people of Indus Valley civilization have used monsoon wind and currents for the maritime trade and navigation in 2500 BC. And if you look at the Indus Valley civilization and all the signatures and all the signs, then you will see the part of the ocean depicted in all our cultural embodiments. And my talk will probably cover some of the pertinent points, and we'll start with the importance of oceans, and then we'll go with marine biodiversity of India, phylum wise, and the status of marine biodiversity in India, and what are the major threats and what are the emerging issues, and then what are the research options to move ahead, and what are possibly that we can do as individuals, collectively, and then as a political system to save the ocean, which is at present facing a lot of threats, primarily because of the human activities. When you look at the ocean, and we all know that today all the 71% of our planet is covered with water, and that is salt water. And imagine if the earth were flat, and then the depth of the water would have been 3.7 kilometers. So that is the amount of water which is there in the ocean. And nearly 98% of the earth's water is stored in ocean. And probably that will be one of the future sources of water as well, when we look at the futuristic scenario. And then remember, you take the entire living organism in the planet, then nearly 98% of the earth's water, 90% of the total biomass of earth is in oceans. And as far as human beings are concerned, 40% of the world population lives 60 kilometers from a coast. That means most of the people in our planet are more or less close to the ocean. And also you can see that this is the largest physical feature on Earth, because it covers maximum part of the Earth's surface. And then probably you may think about the largest mountain ranges in the world as Everest, but still in the ocean we have larger mountains than Everest. Earth's highest peaks, deepest valleys, and flattest plains all are found in the ocean. And also throughout the ocean, there is one interconnected circulation system powered by wind, tides, and the forces of Earth's rotation. And therefore, the world climate is regulated by oceans. And in India, the monsoon is strongly influenced by the oceans around us. And also, you remember that the major part of the carbon dioxide that the organisms produce in the world, and this is absorbed by the ocean. And also, the ocean play a very important role in heat budget of the ocean, because the maximum amount of heat that is there in the atmosphere, it is actually again absorbed by the ocean, and that's the reason why ocean also swell in some instances. And then remember that more than 50% of the oxygen produced in the world are the contribution of the oceans, especially the minute phytoplanktonic organisms that actually float on the water surface. And probably there is a misconception that the maximum amount of oxygen is produced by the rainforest. It is not true. It is actually the ocean, the minute phytoplankton which float on the surface of the ocean, that actually produces maximum amount of oxygen for our survival. And then it is also an integral part of the biogeochemical cycles. For example, if you think about the nitrogen cycle, sulfur cycle, phosphorus cycle, carbon cycle, all these cycles remain connected with the ocean in some way or other. And then if you look at the many of the other systems, for example, a small Indian states like Kerala or any other state like Goa, you can see that the land area is immediately connected with the oceans, and also the land-based aquatic ecosystems as well as the health of the forest, everything remain interconnected. And probably the major handicap of science which we learn now is that we never think about the interconnectivity. For example, if there is Western Ghats and the rain in the Western Ghats and the river in the Western Ghats, and all of them originate primarily because we have the water vapor emanating from the ocean, and it is stopped by the Western Ghats, and then the rain starts. And if there is actually a water flow in the form of a river, and then the origin actually begins from the ocean. So this is the interconnectedness that is very important. And in an ecological study or in an ecosystem perspective, we should have a thorough understanding how the ecosystems remain connected. Unfortunately, in our educational system, we study it separately. We study ocean separate, we study lakes separate, we study the rivers separate, and hardly we understand anything about the interconnectivity of the system. And then oceans play a very critical role in maintaining this kind of an interconnectivity. That is also very important. And also, if you look at the explorations that happened in the world in search of life, in search of minerals, etc., and then you will understand that ocean is the largest unexplored place on Earth. Less than 5% of it has been explored. That means almost 95% of the ocean remains to be explored for any of the human purposes. And although the ocean is large, it is finite. Are actually an earlier concept that the resources are not resources are infinite, but it is not so. It is all the resources are finite. And then oceans constitute over 90% of the habitable space on Earth. And you can see that as far as the terrestrial area is concerned, everything clings to the surface, or some of them are in the air. But you can see that in many of the organisms in the ocean, they float. That means they are subjected to a three-dimensional habitat as far as the marine system is concerned. But the problem with the ocean is that, unlike the terrestrial environment, it's not easy to explore, because most of the unexplored area in the ocean is in the depth of the oceans, which is not easy to explore. But we have now the technologies. We have the remotely operated vehicles which can travel even up to the great canyons all over the oceans. So the technology make it very possible to actually explore almost every part of the oceans now. And then, as you understand, the largest organism in the Earth, as well as the smallest organisms in the world, and they all inhabit the ocean. And then we look at the diversity that is possible in the ocean. And the latest studies shows that the maximum amount of biomass available in the ocean is not the largest organisms, but they are the smallest organisms like the microbes. So if you look at the biomass of the ocean, almost 70% of the biomass in the ocean is represented by the microbes. And also now with this is the COVID-19 era, we always think about the microorganisms and their critical role in the environment. We will see that almost nothing is known about the microbial system and the microbial network in the ocean, and what is exactly the role these organisms play as far as the health of the marine ecosystem is concerned, and as far as the dynamics of the ocean is concerned. So this is another thing which we have to remember when we think about the diversity in the ocean. And then think, as biologists or the students of biology, we always wonder how many phyla may be possible, because the animals are all classified as phyla. Then you look at the one of the latest discovery of an animal phylum, and this is less than 1 millimeter long. This is called phylum Cycliophora, and phylum Cycliophora was discovered in 1995, and phylum Cycliophora lives inside the buccal cavity, to be precise, inside the mouth parts of a lobster. That means the habitat for a phylum is actually the buccal cavity of a lobster. So that means we are exploring more into the depth of the biology, and then we are finding out the interesting specimens throughout the world. And then just like the terrestrial system, we had a feeling that larger organisms in the oceans were all discovered. For example, the larger organism, for example, the mammals, marine mammals. But that is not true. Even the larger whales and dolphins are still being discovered in some part of the world. For example, what you see here is actually the Peruvian beaked whale. It's one of the latest additions to the marine biodiversity, which means even larger organisms are now discovered, and some are actually redescribed and rediscovered after a long time because of the technology available. Okay, so this is something interesting which I wanted. I am showing it here, and this is called the megamouth shark. It is again a latest addition in the Japanese waters, discovered few decades back. And look at this animal; it carries almost all the features of the ancient relatives, but still surviving in the ocean without much morphological changes. So this megamouth shark is also another interesting example, interesting discovery as far as marine biodiversity is concerned. Okay. And then normally biodiversity is represented in the three planes, and one is genetic diversity, the way in which the genes express their diversity within the species. That is also very much expressed as far as the marine ecosystem is concerned. This is one of the fundamental factor which drives something called the blue biotechnology, or the biotechnology based on the oceans. And we have larger species diversity in the ocean. As I told you, it's not fully explored so far. And ecosystem diversity. And the ecosystem diversity within the ocean, if you consider ocean as an ecosystem, and you have large number of smaller micro ecosystems, or the communities within the ocean, which all form part of the ecosystem diversity as far as ocean is concerned. For example, you look at the coral reef, look at the coastal ecosystem like mangroves, everything is actually part of the ecosystem diversity there. And there is yet another category of biodiversity, which is called functional biodiversity, which is also very much there in the ocean, even though we don't know much of the dynamics of this. And functional diversity is nothing but the variety of biological processes, functions, or the characteristics of a particular ecosystem. So the functional role of organisms in the ocean is not fully known to us, and this is an area where probably we can extend our investigations. So I would also like to bring to your attention to a study which is recently concluded, and this is called Census of Marine Life. And probably this is one of the largest projects ever done in biology in the recent past. It is almost completed theoretically in 2010, but still the discoveries are being published. And as part of the Census of Marine Life, which involve 2,700 scientists from 80 nations, including India, and they have done 30 million observations in different part of the oceans in different regions of the world. And then they studied only three things. One, what did live in the oceans? What does live in the oceans? And what will live in the oceans? And very interesting study, because in the 5 years of exploration, they have discovered almost 30,000 new species of organisms. In addition, they have actually put all these observations, 30 million observations, as a database in the website. This is called Ocean Biodiversity Information System. So that is one of the future areas of research where whatever you actually study, whatever information you compile, you put it in the form of the digital platform, so that the future generation as well as current generation will get all the benefit out of the study, which of course is made with the public money. And this is one typical example, this video, which shows you how the scientists in the Census of Marine Life, they have conducted the study in different parts of the ocean.
What are the consequences of knowing so little about the biodiversity of life in the oceans and its ties to the health of the planet? All nations are affected by overfishing, the breakdown of international fisheries, pollution, and the destruction of coastal habitats. Shifts in ocean temperatures affect where a species decides.
So one of the study they did is actually the climatic studies, how the nutrients are distributed in the ocean, and how the ocean food web remain connected.
As ocean conditions change. In fact, our seas hold innumerable mysterious species that react to and impact the environment in which they live. These are but a few examples of the complex underwater world. As the system transforms, how is every other species in the food web impacted, including humans?
So this is one interesting study which involved acoustic sensing, DNA barcoding, as well as tagging. And this is a typical example of acoustic sensing. Yeah, which actually helped in assessing the fish stock populations across the world. And they identified the organism using DNA barcoding, even with an egg, with a full organism, or one with a small part of the body. And all of them ultimately go into the database with a proper label, and then attaching the sensors into the body, so that, yeah, and tag the radio label tag.
We are better equipped to know where and why these fish die. These tags also collect ecosystem data from the animals.
And the tags will also collect all the ecosystem details.
Earth is a water planet. Not only are the oceans Ocean Biogeographic Information System, a gigantic global database available to people worldwide.
Now, if you look at the database, all the data of this research is available in the Ocean Biodiversity Information System.
Manage our fisheries, coastal ecosystems, and water pollution. Detect harmful bacteria in our seas. Discover new pharmaceuticals. We rely on the oceans for energy, weather, food, and recreation. We must invest in technologies that allow us to understand the relationship between us and the rich ecosystem which we are a part of.
So all these studies show how technology is very important as far as the documenting the diversity of the ocean is concerned. So with this kind of technology, we can very well investigate the life, and we can very well characterize the life, as well as we can document everything in precisely, so that everybody will get the benefit out of that. So this is one of the latest studies. What would be the maximum diversity possible on the planet Earth? And this study, which is published last year, we show that the diversity of life on the Earth is primarily represented by the microbes. And this study shows that Earth is home to about 1 trillion or 10 raised to 12 microbial species. So our understanding about the diversity is now totally changing, because the ocean, 70% of the biomass is represented by the microbes. Earth carry almost 1 trillion species of organisms, which means the concept of biodiversity is actually now coming more and more closer towards the microbial system. And there is a lot of investigation on the gut microflora as well, because as a human species, we ourselves carry thousands of bacteria inside our gut, which of course has positive and negative impact on the human body. And then if you look at the diversity, of the marine ecosystem and how this is connected with human species and our economics and our development, our commerce, etc., then you will see that the global nations are now focusing their attention on two aspects. One is blue growth, and the another is the blue development, or the so-called blue economy. And if you look at the total species which is discovered in the planet now, it is almost 2 million now. And out of this 2 million species in the planet Earth, 1/6 lives in the oceans. And which means the ocean is totally unexplored in many parts of the world, because the unexplored deep sea, which represents 60% of the Earth's surface, could hold tens of millions of undiscovered species. And this is an area where still in India, we can do a lot of work. And in the tropical area, as you are aware, just like the tropical forest, the tropical ocean also carry a lot of the biodiversity, and the maximum biodiversity, marine biodiversity in the ocean is in the Indo-Pacific, which is one of the hotspot of biodiversity because of the community colonization in this part of the world, because of the high productivity and the tropical, the facilities available in this part of the ocean. And invertebrates are the organisms which are least surveyed as far as the marine biodiversity is concerned, because these are actually the sources of large number of novel molecules for future research. And if you look at the another aspect as far as Indian Ocean is concerned, is the seamounts. Seamounts are nothing but the mountains inside the ocean, which of course is one of the major habitat, because the ocean is open. There are a little number of organisms which actually live there, and they always wanted to have some kind of shelter. So these sea mountains are the areas where many of the organisms, specifically the invertebrates, they come and take shelter and use it as a feeding as well as breeding ground. So sea mountains or sea mounts are one of the area which is least investigated. Now the organizations like NAO and CMLRA, they have started investigating the biodiversity of the sea mounts. So we have large number of sea mounts or sea mountains in the Indian Ocean or Indian Exclusive Economic Zone, and this is an area where we need to investigate more. And for example, fewer than 300 out of the 200,000 existing sea mounts have been explored so far. That means the remaining thing remains to be explored. So it's actually a lot of opportunity to do that research. So I also wanted to share with you some of the recent investigations as far as the deep sea biodiversity is concerned. And as far as India is concerned, we are only beginning to study the deep sea biodiversity. But with the help of modern remotely operated vehicles, the scientists across the world, using the technology, they are going into the depth of the oceans. For example, what you see here on the left side of your screen is actually the Mariana snailfish, a fully grown fish which is discovered from the Mariana Trench. And it lives morphologically very complex, but still they live in the oceans in more than 6,000 meters below the surface of the ocean. And then you can see large number of other organisms which are discovered in the recent past. And scientists are discovering actually almost every new species in every day when they go into the depth of the oceans. Some of the interesting species like the Yeti crab and other organisms, they are very unique. And interestingly, see, when you see an organism at 5,000 meters below the surface of the sea, then you should understand the peculiarities, the biological peculiarities of this organism. For example, this organism should survive at very high pressure. So they should have some chemical mechanism to survive, the protein in the body, which actually enable them to survive in this kind of a condition. And this is a totally anoxic situation. Toxic elements are there. That means their entire body carry a lot of novel molecules which actually enable them to fight against this kind of chemicals in water. And third is that they are living in a totally a dark environment, so they should have some kind of adaptation to survive in that kind of a system. That means all the deep sea organisms carry a lot of novel molecules, which of course is one of the sources for the biologists to work in future. And then when you look at the future of the ocean and what is actually the economic role of ocean, and governments across the world, especially maritime governments across the world, they are concentrating on this aspect called the blue economy or blue growth. And blue economy, as you can see there, it promote a lot of things as far as the economics of the nation is concerned. For example, it is believed that there are few areas, 5 major areas, where the oceans can play a very important role. And one is actually the aquaculture, where the land area, the land in the land, the aquatic ecosystems are coming less and less, and so we need to have a more stronger focus on the coastal and marine ecosystem. That is one area. And the second area is actually the tourism, because throughout the world, coastal tourism is one thing which actually brings in a lot of revenue. And then another area, which of course we have not yet fully explored, is biotechnology, because I told you the marine organisms, they possess a lot of novel molecules in their body, novel antimicrobial, antiviral, and anti-cancer drugs. And this is one area where a lot of money is invested in by the companies to research. And another area is actually the energy. Energy, for example, you look at China. The major part of the China's energy now actually come from the ocean, primarily from the wind turbines, which is installed in the shallow waters, as well as the larger turbines installed there. They use geothermal energy, tidal energy, as well as wind energy, all associated with the marine and coastal ecosystems. So this is one area where still the India has a lot of scope. And another untouched area is actually the minerals available in the ocean. And we have almost the coming to the close of the minerals available in the earth, and then probably we may have to go to the ocean for mining. And this is an area where many nations are now involved, and it is believed that oceans will provide a lot of employment in future in terms of coastal tourism, in terms of shipping, because in through the terrestrial systems and the roads here, it's unable now because we cannot actually expand the roads now. So we have to use all the facilities available through the sea routes and the inland water systems. So there is going to be an increase in the shipping activity, coastal tourism activity, oil and natural gas exploration, and offshore energy production, aquaculture, and there is indefinite scope as far as the deep sea mining is concerned. A lot of environmental issues are there, but still we have to address that also when we go into the mining of the oceans. And if you look at the global conservation agendas, for example, there is Aichi targets for the conservation of biodiversity proposed for 2020. And there also we'll see a stronger focus as far as the aquatic ecosystems are concerned. For example, look at target 12, target 11, target 6, all speaks specifically on the biodiversity conservation. And if you look at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals for 2030, there also, if you look specifically at goal 14, there are other goals also which remain connected with the ocean, but specifically goal 14 is very important, especially when you look at the life below water, for alleviating poverty, for bringing in revenue, and for conservation, etc. So that means even when you look at the future also, the ocean play a very important role, and the conservation play a very important role. Then look at the amount of revenue that a government like India receive every year through the export of marine products. For example, if you look at the year 2017-18, India's seafood export was to the tune of 45,106 crores. And it registered almost a 13.7% growth. That means as far as the economy of the country is concerned, the marine products play a very important role, which also inevitably draw our attention towards sustainable utilization of the marine resources. Then coming to the Indian Ocean, it's actually a wider geographical perspective, and it is undersampled for the marine biodiversity. And also a lot of human activities compared to the other part of the ocean. So this also makes it inevitable to survey the area and to understand what exactly exists in the Indian Ocean, many parts of the Indian Ocean. And coming specifically to the marine biodiversity of India, I'll go with the total estimate as well as group-wise estimate of the biodiversity. First of all, if you ask me the question whether we have a full list of all the marine species documented from India, I will say no. But the whatever data is available is the data which is actually compiled by the Zoological Survey of India, which shows the earlier report by Waffer et al. And Venkataraman and Waffer. It showed the number as 15,000 plus. But the recent study, and out of that, there are 9 critical habitats as far as India is concerned. And you can see that the first and second are all coastal islands, for example, Andaman and Nicobar, Lakshadweep. And then you come to the third, fourth, and fifth. Then you will see that Gulf of Kutch, Gulf of Kambat, and then Gulf of Mannar. All are coral reef areas. Then we have Bidharkanika, Sundarban. Again, both are mangrove area and marshes. And then Gulf of Malvan and Gulf of Karwar. So you can see that in general, if you look at all the 9 critical habitats as far as marine biodiversity is concerned, are all either coral reef areas or they are associated with mangrove ecosystem. So that is the importance of the coral reef as well as mangroves as far as the marine biodiversity of India is concerned. And the recent compilation by the Zoological Survey of India consider the total diversity of organisms recorded from India as 21,663. So every year we are discovering new species, so the list is actually expanding year after year. But of course, you should understand that this is an underrepresentation as far as biodiversity is concerned, because many of the areas, including the very shallow, the coastal waters, are not properly surveyed because of our own limitations. Okay, I will go species wise or phylum wise or group wise. For example, you first the most important, economically important plant as far as the marine ecosystem is concerned are seaweeds, and most of them are exploited as a food material and for making a lot of products. And our diversity is around 1,053 from India, and in many areas they are commercially exploited as well. And then as far as seagrass is concerned, we don't have that much of a diversity. We have around 14 species from all the ecosystems, including the coral reef ecosystems in India. And as far as Protozoa, now it is called Protista. Again, it is divided into different phyla now. But all the things, the previous classification called Protozoa, it carries around 2,577 species in India. But again, this is a group which is underestimated as far as the biodiversity in India is concerned. Another group is the sponges, represented by the phylum Porifera. We have around 476 species, and very interesting group. Unfortunately, we have one or two taxonomists only working in this field, in this group. A lot of things to discover, a lot of things to document. And one group is in the Schedule 1. The calcareous sponges are in the Schedule 1 of Wildlife Protection Act of India. And then the phylum Cnidaria, formerly called the Coelenterata, is represented by around 1,331 species in India. Very interesting groups among this is the Actiniaria. Sea anemones represented by 75 species. And even our studies, recent studies show that there are a large number of unidentified species along the Indian coast. And as such, we have no international experts working on Actiniaria now. There were a few earlier, but nobody at present working on sea anemones. Very interesting group of organisms. A lot of bioactive compounds derived from that. And even from the shallow waters, our documentation is very less. Another group where, again, lesser taxonomic expertise in India is Hydrozoa, represented by 178 species. And few youngsters now started working on it, but still a lot of things to do as far as hydrozoans in India is concerned. Then the jellyfishes in India is very important in the recent past, primarily because their number is increasing in the recent past because of the changes in the ocean, man-made changes, climatic changes. All these things contribute to their blooms in many parts of the world. And Scyphozoa is in India is represented by 178 species. Cubozoa, the cube jellyfish, by 30 species. And as far as the cnidarians are concerned, the corals, all the corals, including hard corals, soft corals, they're all in the Schedule 1 of the Wildlife Protection Act, because they're very important as far as conservation is concerned, as well as ecosystem functioning is concerned. So these are, again, especially the soft corals are one group where we need to do a lot of research. Another phylum, minor phylum, is Taurozoa. We have one species represented there. Still, a lot of scope to do. Anthozoans represented by more than 1,000 species in Indian waters. The comb jellies represented by the phylum Ctenophora, 12 species. Then we have the so-called flatworms or the platyhelminthes, very beautiful animals in the ocean, especially in the tropical ocean. And still, we have no real international taxonomies working in the taxonomy of platyhelminthes. We have more than 800 species in this group. And one of the largest species group as far as the marine ecosystem in India is concerned is the Arthropoda, represented by a large number of organisms, including the brachyuran crabs, lobsters, shrimps, and many other groups. And even we are discovering quite a lot of new species in the recent past. So a lot of organisms are there still to be discovered. And then the very interesting sea spiders, Pycnogonida, but it is represented by 36 species in India. But many of us are probably unaware of this very strange and interesting group of animals. And something called the living fossil, the king crab in the group Murostomata. We have 2 species in India. Very interesting group, but there are a lot of studies, including the culture of this organism is going on in many parts of India. Very interesting group, very common in the Orissa coast. And we have another group of crustacean called the Copepoda, both free living and parasitic, present in the Indian waters, more than 500 species. Ostracoda, represented by 125 species. Branchiura, including the fish lice, represented by 4 species. And we have Thecostraca, represented by 74 species. Very interesting group of organisms, including the very interesting barnacles. Then Mycetacea, represented by 84 species. Then Euphausiacea, represented by 23 species. Then we have Cumacia, represented by 88 species. All are arthropods. Then Canaidacea, represented by 3 species. Then we have Isopoda, both free living and parasitic, represented by more than 300 species in India. Then Amphipoda, another very interesting group, very common in the shallow waters as well as in the intertidal zone, represented by 167 species. Then the mantis shrimps, or the stomatopods, the organism with one of the most powerful claws, powerful strike as far as the marine organisms are concerned. They are represented by 93 species. Crabs are relatively well studied, represented by 705 species. Still, a lot of things are added to the crab diversity of India. Then we have the anomuran crabs, represented by the hermit crabs, as well as many other unique lobsters, and then sand lobsters, etc. They are represented by 120 species. Caridia, represented by 439 species. Then Nematina, it's a worm, very long worms, and they are represented by 6 species. There may be more. There may be more because nobody is specifically working on that group. And we have Natho stomulida, very common in the sandy areas, and they are represented by 4 species. Still, a lot of things to be discovered because we have no real experts in India. Gastrotricha is represented by 61 species. Again, we don't have that much of expertise in India. Rotifera, 47 species. Ciliata, represented by 218 species. Caenorrhinga, represented by 10 species. Acanthocephala, primarily parasitic, they are represented by 220 species. And we have Endoprocta. Endoprocta also, we don't have taxonomic expertise in India, 4 species. Nematoda. Nematoda, few people are working in India. but still a lot of things to be discovered, because they are present both in parasitic form, free living form. They're present in almost all the habitats, including surface water, including the benthic environment, etc. So they are represented by 356 species. Then Phoronida represented by 3 species, quite a lot of possibilities in India. Brachiopoda, 4 species. Then Mollusca, again the next after Arthropoda, next higher diverse group in India, more than 2,388 species. Quite diverse and quite complex group. Then we have another smaller group of organisms called Bryozoa. Again, we don't have that much of expertise in India. People worked earlier, but nobody at present working. It's called Bryozoa, 272 species. Cyphangulida is again a worm-like animal, represented by 38 species. Annelida, the worms, very beautiful and very interesting group of organisms, 584 species. There are people working on it in India. Then Echiura is another group, represented by 48 species. Tardigrada, 8 species. You have to remember, these are one of the, the strong, even though very small, one of the strongest animals. Even some of the close relatives are believed to survive even in the outer space without much problem for several days. Very complex group, but somebody has to work on its biology as well as the biochemistry in future. Then Echinodermata is a phylum which is exclusively marine, primarily living only in the marine ecosystem, represented by the sea star, the crinoids, the ophiuroids, the sea urchins, the sea cucumbers. Remember, among these sea cucumbers, all the sea cucumbers in India is represented in the Schedule 1 of Wildlife Protection Act, primarily because of its export and its use as a food material in many other countries, especially in China. So they are in the Schedule 1 of the Wildlife Protection Act. Then we have the Ketonats, represented by 44 species. We have the Protochordata, represented by 522 species. Again, not much taxonomic expertise here in India. Then Hemichordata, 14 species. Still, we may have more in India. And coming to the vertebrates, we have the fish. Again, one of the largest diverse group among the vertebrates, represented by more than 2,600 species. And among the fishes, there are some organisms to be specifically studied or known. And one group is the Syngnathiforms, represented by the seahorses and primarily by the seahorses. And the pipe fishes, they all have a the pipe-like body, and both of them are in the Schedule 1 of the Wildlife Protection Act. And primary reason is that seahorse is one of the major ingredient in Oriental medicine, especially Chinese medicine. They are exported in thousands. For example, in 2010, there is a report that from India we have reported almost 1 million specimens of dried seahorses, primarily to the Southeast Asia and China. So this is one reason which has actually driven them to almost extinction, and that is the reason why the Indian government has put them in the Schedule 1. And we have the largest fish in the world, the whale shark, that is also there in the Schedule 1, and some other animals, primarily represented by the sharks and rays, represented in the Schedule 1 of Wildlife Protection Act, primarily because they are all hunted. They are large animals, large carnivores. They are hunted in large numbers, and that is the reason why they are all driven to this kind of a status. And remember, some of the sawfishes are not recorded in the recent past as well. And that is the reason why the sawfish, the Pristis, is considered as more threatened than tigers, because they are, not very efficient swimmers, just like sharks, but they are very easy to hunt them. And then they are hunted in large numbers, primarily for the extraction of fin, and then they are almost on the verge of extinction. And in the Indian coast, they are sighted in the last 10 years. only around 10 times. So that means any person in India seeing this animal, it's a rare record. And if you are actually seeing them live with fishermen, ask them to leave it back to the ocean because they are very rare tigers. And a large number of the fishes in different ecosystems, especially in the coral reef ecosystems, and they also support our economy considerably. And reptiles, we have around 26 species in different parts of India, and we have the ambassadors of the oceans represented by the turtles, and we have 5 turtles in Indian waters, and 4 of them, like olive ridley, green turtle, leatherback, hawksbill, they all breed in Indian coastal waters. That is the reason why they are all very important, and they are important because of their very peculiar biology and their ecosystem connectivity, especially the very critical role they play in the food web of the oceans. And if you consider the coastal area also, then we have only one species, one of the largest reptile in India. This is the saltwater crocodile. And some part of the India, it is almost extinct. For example, Kerala had a record in 1960s about the saltwater crocodile, but after that nobody has seen it. So this is one of locally extinct as far as states like Kerala is concerned. And coming to the birds, again a little studied a group of organisms. Total number of the global diversity is around 359 species, but in India we have recorded around 63 species. So a lot of work as far as the seabirds in India is concerned, represented by a large number of gulls and terns, and very interesting migratory pattern as well in India. And the skuas, the shearwaters, the petrels, the master booby, and some rare bird standings as far as Indian waters are concerned. So there is no serious study definitely onto the seabirds. This is an area where with the help of the local communities, we have to have a stronger database on the seabirds of India. And as far as the mammals are concerned, majority of them, as you see in the graph, they occur in the coral reef areas. But this is again another group of organisms which we need to study, specifically the migratory pattern, feeding ground, breeding ground, etc. We have around latest record, including many of the taxonomic revisions are happening with regard to larger animals like whales and dolphins. So the recent record says that we have around 29 species of mammals, including the porpoise, whales, and dolphins, and the most importantly the dugong, very critically endangered organism. And this is the study which we have initiated last year, because 2 years back we got a phone call from one of our friend in Gujarat, Deepani, who is working in the Arabian humpback whale network, and we are informed that a tagged humpback whale, which is tagged in the Oman waters, they started its journey towards India. So since the tag is connected, actually in Oman, the scientists have tagged almost 24 whales, humpback whales. And then one of them started traveling towards India. They came towards close to Goa and started its journey from Goa towards Kerala. And then we went to the, and with the help of Coast Guard ships, tried to actually follow it up. And that satellite data is available in the lab for the scientists in Oman. They are actually tracking their presence, and this humpback whale came to Kerala, one female. It came to Kerala coast, and it traveled up to Gulf of Mannar, stayed there almost 1 week, and then returned. Then they reached back to the Oman waters. So there are a large number of research questions here. And one, why this animal started its migration, and what is the reason? Probably there are 2 reasons. And one is that they are traveling in search of a mate, because every animal wanted to have some kind of expansion of the gene pool, so they tried to find out different populations in different part of the ocean, and that is one reason. And second is that actually they are using this as a breeding ground, and so that the young ones will get sufficient food, and then the young ones will go back along with their parents. So these are the questions which remains to be answered. And now the scientists are actually deploying many acoustic instruments along the Indian coast to record the sound, because the humpback whale, they have the beautiful sound, the song. And even without seeing the animal, we can record their sound, and with this kind of acoustic instruments, we can study the migratory path of these organisms. So, and interestingly, this is an interesting migratory route. Via the Kerala coast, they go to the Sri Lankan waters, including the blue whale, and then this is a migratory path. So very interesting path to be studied in future for understanding much about these organisms. Okay, coming to the major issues which is there in the Indian waters. As you will see, majority of these scientific reports show that these organisms are primarily hunted or caught in the fishing nets. So fishing is one of the major threats as far as larger fishes are concerned. Overexploitation of the top predators are there in the ocean. And we know, as far as terrestrial ecosystems are concerned, we know about the population of tigers, then lion, and all the larger carnivorous animals. But we don't have a clear idea about what is happening to the carnivores in the ocean. Throughout the tropics, throughout the world's oceans, the predators are now declining in population. And this is a very strange phenomena, because what will be the cascading impact of the removal of the predators down in the food web? We are not totally aware, because many of the complex food chains and food web available in the ocean is not fully known to us. That is one issue. And then again, as far as India is concerned, I'm not going the details, because this will again become a taxonomy lecture. But as far as India is concerned, first thing we have to do as far as marine biodiversity is concerned is actually try to document the existing diversity. For example, many of the documentations in India are quite old, and then there are no subsequent records. And many of the groups, we don't have even experts. So this is one thing which we need to do, the so-called taxonomic impediment, or the lesser number of taxonomics available for studying marine biodiversity in India. We need to overcome that. And for that, we need to have some kind of stronger programs as far as marine biodiversity documentation is concerned. And this is one thing which India need to do to document the biodiversity. And the state of knowledge is far from complete. I told you we have around only 25,000 species described from the larger ocean around India, including the coral reef area. So there are a lot of things which we need to do through coordinated projects by involving the local people, including citizen scientists, para-taxonomists. We have a larger role to play, primarily to document biodiversity. Unfortunately, when you talk about conservation, for many of the ecosystem, we don't have a biodiversity profile, because lesser number of studies available in India. So what we need to do in future is to have a stronger database of marine biodiversity in different parts of the ocean, not only in the coral reef, but even in the shallow waters of different states across India. And also, we don't have even if this taxonomy is there, many of them may not have a voucher specimen for others to have a look at it. So all these things are still there as far as marine biodiversity in India is concerned. And also, there are quite a number of wrong identifications. For example, as far as the first certified fishery in India is concerned, this is the Ashtamudi short-neck clam. And it is believed that it was a species called Paphia malabarica. But our studies, both using morphological and molecular tools, consider that the certified fishery is actually not Paphia, but it is something called Marcia recens. And this is the DNA barcode data, which actually put these animals as a different clade along with the Marcia recens, which shows that even the certified fishery, the identification is going wrong, primarily because there is no in-depth taxonomy happening in India. And another typical example where we need to combine the molecular taxonomy along with the morphological taxonomy. If you look at any crab fishery data in India, you can see in the slide there are 4 organisms, and almost all of them look almost similar. And all of them in the fishery terms, they're all classified as Portunus pelagicus. And the recent studies, including molecular details, show that they are not one species, but basically they are all cryptic. They are now divided into 4 different species. And that means in India, Portunus pelagicus is there or not, we don't know. But what is there in India, we know is actually Portunus seguinis and Portunus reticulatus. This is actually the situation. So that means we need to have a much stronger study, especially when you document the fishery data. We need to have a stronger orientation towards taxonomy as well, which this ultimately bring to a point that we just like Einstein said, we need not actually reinvent the same thing again and again, because in India we have a large number of marine institutions and then universities and other academic institutions working on marine biodiversity. Everybody do the same work, repeat the same work. We need not do that. What we need to do is actually separate out the work, or do the collaborative work, and bring out a very good database rather than working as a watertight compartment. And this is one of the problem as far as Indian research is concerned. We need to have much better collaboration, better coordination for high quality research, including using the molecular and other tools, or some kind of integrative taxonomy that actually consider everything together along with the morphological taxonomy. So we need to have a stronger policy to overcome this kind of a taxonomic impediment. This can be done only by adopting 3C principles. 3C principle means collaboration, coordination, and communities. That means we need to collaborate between the institutions, and there should be a coordinating institute actually who can actually take up. Even an individual can take up a major taxonomic survey, and we need to involve the communities. Communities means if you go to the field, especially in the marine area, without the communities, without the fishing communities, local communities, very difficult to work. So we need to have a reorientation in the thinking as far as the taxonomic research is concerned. And then see the main problem, if you think or if you propose something about the tiger, a lion, everybody will listen. But if you propose something about a dolphin or a shark, nobody will listen. And ultimately there is a public dilemma. And the issue is that public throughout the world do not recognize the value of the marine species. And then we are actually the one to solve this issue. For example, a shark in an ocean is as important as a tiger in a forest. So because they are the top predator, they are the top of the food chain, so they play a very, very important role. So what is the solution to remove this public dilemma as far as marine biodiversity is concerned? One, we need better information about the biodiversity, and then we need better marketing. For example, if I am working on dolphins, and then my interest is only publishing the data and publishing the research paper, nothing more, and then nobody will understand it. So what you have to do is actually marketing. Marketing means use it as an iconic species. Tell the politicians why they are important. Tell the fishermen why this dolphin is important in the ecosystem as far as fish health is concerned and fish stock is concerned. So also project out certain species as a charismatic species, because we need better awareness tool. They serve as a better awareness tools. And then we need to bring in these animals also in the legal framework and also in the environmental impact assessment, so that the public will understand why marine biodiversity is important and why these organisms are important as far as the future of the oceans are concerned. And I told you already, as far as research is concerned, we need to train parataxonomists. I still remember meeting Denson in Costa Rica. He was actually attending a seminar on DNA barcoding, and he is the person who actually initiated, coined the term called parataxonomy. What he did is he actually was working with the moths, the butterflies in Costa Rica. And Costa Rica, as you are aware, is one of the most biodiverse country in the world. So a researcher in his lifespan may not be able to document all the insect biodiversity there. But at the same time, there are a large number of tribals, who are actually well versed with this area. So what he did is actually he gave them training only to collect, how better you collect the organism without any damage, and document them, and how to process them and bring it to the lab. So he trained these taxonomists, and then in the last 5 years time, They have recorded almost all the butterflies in the Costa Rica, and it's a strong database now. So this is the importance of parataxonomy. So we need to involve the people, the local people, in our research, so that they will also come and they will also help in the whole taxonomic affair. They can also be given the honorarium, so they'll be also happy to collaborate with you, and they will also understand what exactly you are working and what is the relevance of your work in the long term. Another thing, as far as India is concerned, a lot of people who are working as amateurs, who are as we can consider them as citizen scientists. And fortunately for India, we have a large number of people working in butterflies and birds, but not in the marine system. So citizen science is actually science is one thing which we need to promote, because without the communities we cannot progress. And biodiversity informatics is another thing. We need to put every information in the public domain. I still remember some of the government departments still, when we approach for a data, they say that biodiversity data is something very precious and you cannot share. So this is public money, and unless and until you share the data, you cannot have any kind of conservation program in the long run. So this kind of a kind of strong database with the informatics platform is also very important. And also people should also write about the species, about their natural history in the local language, so that the common man will also understand a lot of that. So this is the way in which we can remove the public dilemma. And there is something called Linnaean shortfall, because many of the species are not discovered. This phenomenon is called the Linnaean shortfall. So how can we address? No way but to work on a specific group. For example, I still remember when I have given a project on hermit crabs of Kerala coast to one of my PhD students, Rashmi. And when she started working on Kerala coast, there were only 9 species recorded from the Kerala waters. And in 3 years' time, despite all the limitations in collection, etc., she collected 40 species from Kerala coast alone. And we have more than 5 new species recorded from the Kerala coast. So this is an area where, unless a youngster actually take a smaller group of organism, documentation is rather difficult. So only by recruiting taxonomists we can overcome this issue. And there is another issue called Wallacean shortfall, because our inadequate knowledge of the distribution of the species. See, if I am working on Kerala coast and somebody working in Goan coast, somebody in the West Bengal coast, so in between there are a large number of states where we have no documents available. So marine species are extensively distributed. So that means we need to have a kind of survey involving all the maritime states of India. So then only we will understand what is a distribution pattern. This is very important in conservation, because if the species is distributed throughout the Indian waters, no issue. At the same time, one species discovered from here and it is considered as not available anywhere else, then it is actually a species which we conserve. So we need to have better knowledge about the distribution, and that is the way in which we can overcome Wallacean shortfall. And time scale data, that is also not there. For example, if I collect from an organism this year, there is no previous record. So we consider that information from this year only for future research. You don't know what is actually the distribution pattern in the previous year. So the time scale data is also very important, just like the spatial data. And this is also important. Another issue, what is actually the functional role of an organism? And this is there in the terrestrial ecosystem as well, but we don't know what exactly is the role of a species in the ecosystem, and that should be known. And if you really wanted to have a better perspective about the organism and the biodiversity, we need to know the 4th level of biodiversity, that is called the functional biodiversity. And also the Darwinian shortfall, which speaks about the evolutionary and phylogenetic data. We know about the organisms, but we don't know how the evolution what is citizen science. Very important. For example, large number of fishermen are there in the field, and if some of them who are interested can also help you, it's very important. This is actually a publication which we made a few years back, and actually there is one group called Friends of Marine Life, and they are basically fishermen, and they were working on the underwater documentation of the biodiversity. And then they started documenting about the biodiversity and of the sea slugs. They have taken wonderful photographs, and then they have come to us to help in identification. We have not collected, but they have taken very good photographs, and we have the expertise in identifying the sea slugs, and we identified. And they, in a few months of their survey, the fishermen could collect 15 species, and out of them, 2 species were new to India, new records to India. So, you know, they are. This is one typical example how the help of the fishermen can be obtained for collecting a data, and we can help them, include them in our paper. And this will be a classical example of how jointly we can work for documenting the species. And definitely we can use all the other tools like integrative taxonomy, etc. And if you look at the different group of organisms in India, marine organisms, and then you can see that DNA barcode data or molecular data is available for only very few number of organisms. So if you really wanted to have an integrative taxonomy and you know, develop your taxonomy to a higher level, we need to have some kind of integrative taxonomic data available in order to strengthen our taxonomy as well as project our research in different parts of the world. Okay. I told you about the lesser number of work available in the deep sea, and this is an area where India can still focus. And that is the reason why some of the scientists said that deep sea is lesser known than the moon as far as the depth of information is concerned. Okay, now I'll come to specifically to the issues in the oceans, including in India. And this is the paper which is published last week in Nature. By Dorrit and his team. They have taken data for the last 100 years, and what are the major issues of marine biodiversity. And they started from 1860. Major issue was actually hunting. Now that is not an issue. For example, whaling, and whaling has been stopped in many parts of the world by legal instruments. And fishing, of course, now it's one of the major threats. And another threat is actually deforestation. Deforestation in the ocean means the removal of the coastal mangroves as well as the seabeds and kelp forest in many parts of the world. And then habitat loss. Many of the habitats are actually intervened by the human activity. And the recent biodiversity report by the United Nations show that 60% of the ocean is actually troubled by the human activities. And then something which actually we have not discussed so far in greater depth, and that is about the amount of fertilizers or nutrients that is reached into the coastal waters. And this is one area where we need to study a lot. We focus our attention only on plastics, but there is a serious issue of leaching out of fertilizers or nutrients into the coastal waters, which ultimately lead to eutrophication, production of harmful algal blooms, etc. Another area where Indian research need to focus is synthetic chemicals. A lot of synthetic chemicals are actually reaching into the ocean, and they are, some of them are even endocrine disruptors. And this is an area where we need to do a lot of research. And finally, in the last 40 years, the major threat now is climate change, as you can see in the graph. So if you look at the pressure in the last 100 years, it is changing from the hunting to fishing to deforestation to habitat loss, and ultimately we have reached where the climate change is one of the major threats in the ocean. Incidentally, this year, today, the Earth Day has a theme as climate change to save the Earth from the disasters of climate change. Okay. Now, what are the signs of unsustainability in India? That means, what are the indicators that shows that the marine system is in danger? One, marine fisheries. And our capture fisheries is almost reaching a plateau. That means even if we increase the fishing pressure, there is not going to be much return. Second, we have something called fishing down the food web. Fishing down the food web is actually a terminology coined by a very famous marine biologist called Daniel Pauly. he says that, over a period when you fish continuously from an ecosystem, especially a marine ecosystem, you are removing larger predators. So when you fish subsequently, you will get only the smaller predators and herbivores. That means the catch in India is now represented primarily by the secondary carnivores and herbivores, etc. That means the amount of herbivores in the catch is increasing because we have removed almost all the predators. So this is an indication. And another issue is shifting baseline. Shifting baseline means, so any kind of research, for example, climate change, you wanted to study the impact of climate change on the oceanic resources, and you have a baseline data. But if baseline data is not available, what will you do? You consider the present data as the baseline and then work on it subsequently. So this is a problem. That means next time when you do another research, you shift your baseline and then work from that. So this kind of a data will not serve any purpose as far as conservation is concerned. This is another issue. Then another issue, which is of course an indication of unsustainability at the ecosystem level, is overcapacity. Overcapacity means we have a large number of fishing vessels than the capacity of the coastal waters as far as India is concerned. And this is a serious issue, and this will lead to the unsustainable fishing. And we have a deep sea fishing policy in paper for a longer period of time, but it is not fully implemented. And that is one of the hardships as far as exploitation of offshore fisheries is concerned. And decline in the predatory fishes and increase in the opportunistic species, these are all indications of unsustainability at the ecosystem level as far as India is concerned. Already I told you there is an issue of eutrophication in the coastal waters, which ultimately increase the harmful algal population in India. This is happening. We have no more number of jellyfish blooms, because jellyfish blooms, there are a large number of reasons for that. One is climate change, probably. And second is that we have no larger predators which feed on the jellyfish now, because the dolphin fish, swordfish, the turtles, they used to feed on jellyfish, but they are declining. So jellyfish is now increasing. And another reason, we have more hard structures like the granite wall along the artificial structures along the coastal line for coastal protection. They serve as an ideal platform for the larvae of jellyfish to settle and multiply, and ultimately the population is increasing. And another issue is coral bleaching. Coral bleaching is connected with the climate change and the El Nino phenomena happening. So the algae which is present in the corals, they are leaving the corals, and then ultimately they create a lot of issues. And then there are a lot of issues connected with the trade. For example, I'm not going into the details. For example, a few years back, America stopped import of shrimps, and the reason is that reason was actually environmental. They said that many of the trawlers in India are not using turtle excluder devices in their net. That means the fishing here is not eco-friendly, and that was the reason. But it was sold later. But these kind of tuna conservation issue and the fishing issue and trade issues are happening always, and a lot of gaps are there as far as biodiversity knowledge is concerned. And our fishermen are most impacted as a result of climate change, because they are not getting sufficient resources, and their habitats, their home, their houses are all taken away by the fury of the ocean. And then these are all happening. So that means that we have a lot of work to do as far as making the people adapted to the new situation, as well as giving them alternate livelihood. All these things are there. And then we have a lesser number of marine protected areas, particularly along the west coast of India. And then we don't have a marine science policy. So all these things can be considered as actually the indication of unsustainability as far as resources and the conservation are concerned. So this is an example of the eutrophication and harmful algae blooms in the Indian coastal waters, happening primarily because of the nutrient-enriched coastal waters. And then we have the jellyfish blooms, which impact the fishery, as well as spoil the beaches, spoil its aesthetics in the long run. They are can be considered as an opportunistic species, because they are increasing in number, because they have no predators in the system. And climate change is one of the most impacted issue to be discussed in detail as far as the conservation of coastal resources are concerned. Here, as you can see in the graph, there are 4 issues. One, the sea surface temperature is increasing as a result of global warming, and we have more atmospheric changes happening as a result of that. More storms and cyclones in different parts of India, increasing in frequency. We have the chemistry of water changing as a result of acidification, because we have more carbon dioxide in the water, in the atmosphere. They are dissolved in water, and carbonic acid is formed, and water is becoming more and more acidic. And this phenomenon is called acidification. And then nutrient availability. Nutrient availability to different systems is also impacted. For example, in Indian Ocean, we have a large number of oxygen minimum zones, not discussed in detail in many of the public fora, and that is another issue. We have more number of oxygen minimum zones happening in different parts of the Indian waters, primarily because of the climate change and associated biochemical changes. All these highly complex, what are the things happening? And we have already recorded in the southwest coast of India that one of the most dominant species, like oil sardine, they are migrating northwards, primarily because of the increasing the sea surface temperature, because of climate change, because of El Nino, and then we have more oxygen minimum zones, all impacted sardine fishery along the southwest coast of India. And then we have another record because of the more temperature in the surface waters. Another common dominant species called mackerel, Indian mackerel, they are actually moving into the deeper waters. Another change happening in Indian waters. And we have the reproductive cycles of many of the fishes are also recording changes because of the change in the temperature. And ocean acidification because of more carbonic acid in seawater. We have some of the organisms with the calcareous exoskeleton, like corals, mollusks, and some diatoms. They are going to be impacted as a result of ocean acidification. And coral bleaching in Indian waters. Many of the coral reef ecosystems are facing the same issue because of climate change, because of El Nino. The coral bleaching, which as a result of leaving of the symbiotic algae, zooxanthellae, or now it's called Symbodinium, from the body of the coral reefs, and which ultimately leave the corals white in color without any color. The color is given by the algae. So this coral bleaching or whitening of the corals is another issue because of ocean acidification and climate change. And as you can see from this graph, many of the low-lying areas all along the Indian coast are impacted because of the sea level rise, and this ultimately in the long run will have a lot of socio-economic implications, which of course is to be discussed in detail later. And there are some natural barriers which we have removed, particularly the mangroves and seagrasses. They are the natural barriers in the coastal ecosystems, and once we plan for green shield or biodefense, and these are the things which actually should come in the shallow coastal waters. And not only the marine ecosystem, even that the climate change and the resultant factors are changing the estuarine chemistry, which again not discussed in detail. For example, what are the changes in water chemistry happening in an ecotone like estuaries? And these are the things which in India we need to focus our research, because we don't have that much of data available, especially the water chemistry and change in the biodiversity, especially in estuaries of India. And what are the potential impact of decreased rainfall in the estuaries, and changes in the seasonality of rainfall in the estuaries. And all the things are gap areas as far as research in India is concerned. And as far as fisheries is concerned, we need to have a stronger focus on the responsible fisheries by very serious and proactive interventions, because ultimately the economy of the fisherman is impacted because of all these changes. And another issue, probably we can discuss hours together, which I am not attempting, is actually marine plastic and marine debris, and now microplastics. This is a very serious issue, because a lot of whatever we discard in the land ultimately reaches the sea, primarily through the rivers and estuaries, and this is a very serious issue. And they are also windblown and ultimately carried from the land to the sea, and even accidents in the ocean will also lead to their discharge, and thrown away nets, unused nets back into the ocean. This also increases the plastic pollution, marine debris issue in the ocean. And in fact, 80% of the pollution in the ocean is actually land-based. Only 20% actually originate within the system, and that means we are the major contributor for the marine debris in the ocean is concerned. And over 1 million bags, plastic bags, remain floated in the ocean every year, and 15 plastic shopping bags are there in ocean for every meter of the coastline. And then, in fact, there is no seabird which is without a plastic in their stomach. So this is the situation, which probably we are not discussing in detail. And climate change also facilitate the whole process of breaking down of the larger plastic particles, larger plastic sheets into smaller particles called microplastics. So this is a serious issue. And a recent study published in Science, very interesting study, which is probably many of you have not heard. See, in 2011, there was a tsunami in Japan, and that happened in the coastal waters of Japan, and there were a lot of plastic marine debris floating in the ocean. Along with the tsunami, many of the organisms which were present in the Japanese coastal waters were ultimately carried along with the current, along with the marine debris or the plastic particles into the coast of California. And 280 coastal marine species have crossed the Pacific by making a ride on the plastic debris. So that means even the plastic particles which float on the surface of the ocean, they actually promote bioinvasion, carrying of one species of organism from one part of the ocean to the different part of the ocean. Recently, we have recorded the Mytella strigata, a bivalve from the coastal waters of Kerala, which is replacing totally the native mussel populations. And this is a clear example, and we have linked it with the Oki cyclone. So there is a possibility of the bioinvasion, marine bioinvasion happening as a result of this phenomenon. Okay, so lot of issues connected with the marine plastics, and now the issue is in the ocean is microplastics. Theoretically, by definition, microplastic is any plastic particle below 5 millimeter in size, and they are a potent problem because many of the organisms, they eat it, and even the zooplanktons, they filter the microplastics. An associated issue is that many of these plastic particles, since they float, they have more surface area, they adhere chemical particles on the surface, and then they may bioaccumulate in the filter feeding organisms like mussels, and then they are carried to next trophic level, including human beings. So there's the possibility of chemical contamination, serious chemical contamination also. In addition to that, there are microfibers, microfragments, micropellets, microfilm, microbeads, and which are commonly microforms. Microbeads are commonly used in the cosmetic materials. All these things ultimately reach in ocean in millions, and then they actually are creating a lot of havoc as far as marine ecosystems are concerned. So you can see that what are the sources. Some of them are unheard as far as we are concerned. For example, tire. Most of the tire, after the use, they are thrown away, ultimately reaches the ocean. They are one of the primary sources of microplastics. And then we have synthetic textiles. For example, when you wash a nylon cloth in your washing machine, every washing create millions of particles of synthetic microfibers, which ultimately reach the ocean and create a lot of issue. And even the city dust, the airborne particles, they are also carried into the ocean. The marine coatings, which is used in the boat and all, personal care products, including the cosmetics. All these things are the sources of marine plastics into the ocean. So I am not going into the details of all these things. And but the mainly documented evidence is, as you see in the photographs, are the impact of macroplastics, larger plastic particles. They entangle the organisms, and even the, for example, gill net, which is very commonly used for fishing. Some of the commercial gill nets are 30-kilometer long, used in Pacific and Atlantic. So a 30-kilometer nylon net in the ocean, spread in the ocean, in a fine morning, will entangle thousands of organisms, especially the mammals, marine mammals in it. So they are called the walls of death. Every day they will kill hundreds of marine organisms. As you can see in the photographs, they entangle the fish. Some of them penetrate into the body, and some of them ultimately they either kill it, or they actually damage it, or cause a lot of atrophies in their body, etc. And lot of organisms. This is again a photograph taken by my student Nishant, which shows a gull carrying a plastic lid on its beak while during flight. And also there is actually a lot of social problem also, because this animal find it very difficult to feed, and they are excluded from the society, and the society members would ultimately help them in feeding. And this is actually one of the typical example how the plastics, the macroplastics, can ultimately impact the marine organisms. A lot of other implications are there. For example, these are the recent study which shows that, including the using the fluorescent dyes, even the microscopic filter feeding organisms, they filter out the plastic microbeads into their body, and even the bacteria remain attached to their body, and then ultimately can be carried to the human species. A lot of work is happening in this field. What is actually the chemistry behind that, and how the human beings can be impacted as a result of all these things. So it's a lot of issues caused by the marine organisms, and how they impact the entire the food chain in the ocean in the long run. And as you can see here, a plastic bottle, when you throw it out, in the long run, as a result of the wave action, as a result of the chemical action, as a result of the fire, impact of the light, they are actually converted into small particles called microplastics, and then they cause a lot of cascading impact in the ocean in the long run. So these are some of the issues which we need to focus and manage in the long run. And actually, we are the one to take action, because it requires some kind of upstream management as well as downstream management. Downstream management means we have to remove the plastic from the ocean. Upstream management means we need to reduce the impact of plastic. We need to reduce the consumption of plastics in the land, so that the ocean is saved in the long run. A typical example of that, the downstream management, is there in Kerala, where the government has, fisheries department has initiated a project called Shujitwa Sagara, which envisages cleanup of the sea by employing the fishermen. When they use the trawl net, they collect large number of plastic bags, and the fishermen bring the plastic bag back to the land, and with the help of women self-help group, they are cleaned and shredded, and ultimately used for many purposes, including the construction of a road. So this is something which is happening as a model, which can be followed by other states as well. So large number of things are happening individually also. I would like to highlight a typical case of Afroz Shah from Mumbai. As an individual, he initiated cleaning the Warsaw beach, and he started it individually. Then large number of people joined with him, and now over a period of 5 years, Warsaw is one of the cleanest beaches in India. So that means an individual initiative can make a lot of changes. And last year, happily, even the olive ridley turtles, they came back to the beach for breeding. So a typical example how an individual initiative also can bring in a lot of changes as far as managing the pollution is concerned. So this is very important when we think about the sustainability of marine ecosystems are concerned. And now even technology can be used for solving many of the problems. For example, we have now fish finding devices. We have devices uh, like we have the technology like remote sensing, which can be used for finding out coastal vulnerability, potential fishing zones. Then satellite based ocean energy can be tracked. Oil spills can be tracked with the help of satellite. And then we get a lot of marine spatial data with the help of satellites. So there are technological interventions also happening in this field. So what we need to do in India is also a kind of marine spatial planning. What exists in the coastal area and what are the areas which are vulnerable, which are actually subject to climate change, and this is possible. We need to have a larger marine spatial data collected all along the Indian coast, so that we can have some kind of planning for conserving the coastal area, and also judiciously using it for developmental activities also, which is not there but slowly happening all along the Indian coast. So this is one thing which is happening in a better side. Another thing is that we need to have some kind of a top-down approach, is something which is actually practiced now, but we need to have some kind of a bottom-up approach. Uh, uh, that means we need to have a stronger orientation with the community, and the initiative to conservation should actually come from the communities, and then we will see a long-term change as far as India is concerned. And then ocean is a larger system which remain connected with the man and the society as well as the economy. So we need to have a stronger intervention at right places. For example, regulating climate change, conserving the resources, etc. in the long run. And also for why many of the conservation initiatives and the government policies fail in India is primarily because we don't have a stronger societal orientation in the conservation planning. But it may be possible in a forest ecosystem, but it may not be possible in a coastal ecosystem, because we need to address the economic issues, we need to address the social issues prevailing in the coastal area. So we need to have a stronger awareness for adaptation as far as coastal communities are concerned, and we need to evolve common platforms for sharing the best practices. And also we need to address the transboundary resource use, because the resources in the Indian waters are also used by some other intruders. We need to have a stronger check for that. And for making any policy in the coastal area, we need to hear the fishing communities, even though they are heard, but in the policy level, they are not implemented. That is one thing which actually should happen. And then we need to have alternate livelihood for the fishermen, because many of the areas, the climate change is actually impacting their survival. We as far as India is concerned, we have lesser number of protected areas, marine protected area. There are few protected areas which are associated with the coral reef ecosystems, but there are other biodiversity rich areas as well where we need to focus. And responsible tourism. The coastal tourism is one thing which actually brings in a lot of revenue, but that doesn't mean that we have to make the sophisticated hotels all along the coastline. No, many of the foreign tourists are coming to India not to stay in a 5-star hotel, but to enjoy our the pristine environment, the beauty of the environment, as well as the ecosystem services provided by the environment. So we need to have a responsible tourism policy, especially in the coastal area, mainly to have a kind of sustainable utilization of the resources, as well as involve them in conservation, as well as conserving the beauty of the area. So this is one area where need to have a focus. And towards the concluding slides, we need to have a national strategy on marine science, because 2020 is actually a super year as far as environment is concerned, because a lot of policies are coming towards biodiversity conservation. So we need to have a national policy on marine science, which will address the pertaining issues connected with the marine ecosystem, not only biodiversity, but in a holistic manner. So if you look at the marine coastal areas globally as well, the marine protected area is less represented, less than 3%. And we need to understand the reality. If you look at the reality, the issue is not actually the lack of policies, but actually the poor management of the policies and poor management as well as governance. So what we need to do is actually to strengthen the law and also improve the management and governance issues which is available in this coast of all along the coast. And you look at the marine policies implemented in India, many of them consider people as not good in conservation, communities as not good in conservation. That also should change. For example, if you look at Maharashtra, typical example of mangrove afforestation and also sustainable utilization happening very effectively with the help of the communities, especially the women self-help groups. And co-management is something we need to strongly think in the coastal areas, because the communities should also involve in managing the resources, and this also will ultimately help in connecting ocean to the people. And when you look at the way forward, we need to have a lot of policies coming up. For example, the Indian government is focusing on blue growth and blue economy, where ocean is a central role. Ocean has a central role to play in improving the economy. We have the Aichi Biodiversity Target 2020, which envisages conservation of biodiversity. We have 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, which also has a specific target below water biodiversity. And remember, 2021-2030 is considered as United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. So this is a time where India can take up initiatives in restoring the coastal ecosystem, specifically mangroves and seagrasses. And then we have 2021-2030 is United Nations International Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. That means in future, in the coming decades as well, the ocean science has a prominent role to play for the conservation of nature. Then for a beginner, there are books, because I was inspired by a book called the Sea Around Us by Rachel Carson. And many people who wanted to study the ocean, understand about the oceans, they have to start with some of the classical books, which are available in plenty. You compare to any other ecosystem in the world, we have a large number of books available on the marine ecosystems, like the Sea Around Us, the classical novels like Moby Dick and the Old Man and the Sea, and Song for the Blue Oceans. And the latest book is actually by the Sylvia Earle, who wrote a series of books on oceans. This is a classical book called The Sea Change. So these books are the ones which actually inspire the people to take up work and start loving the oceans. And if you look at the regional languages, we have a large number of books which tells about the ocean, tells about the traditional knowledge about the oceans, and all these things are the living documents as far as our love or connectivity to ocean in future should remain. A lot of classical novels as far as different states in India is concerned, and all these things actually connect people emotionally to the oceans. This is very, very important. And also you look at the classics and the philosophy, Indian philosophy. We have again the entire world standing on the shoulder of a turtle. And then the morning prayer also should start with the ocean, Samudra Vasane Devi. So we have a philosophical thinking strongly oriented towards conservation of the oceans. And the ocean inspires us for many things, including many of the artwork, the painting work, and of course, bio-inspiration is something very important. The living organism in the ocean inspire us to take up a lot of work in producing a large number of molecules. For example, the mussel, which remain attached with the rocks with a byssus thread, a very small thread which attaches the mussel to a rock. And how this small organism can survive in the highest forces of the ocean, the waves and tides. And now the scientists have isolated the chemical molecule from the byssus thread, which is one of the strongest glue ever discovered by the human being. So these are all the things which we can get the benefit back from the marine organisms. And the flipper, the forearms of a humpback whale, ultimately have given the design for a wind turbine, which is the most efficient wind turbine in the world. And the shark, the texture of the shark skin is actually now copied in making the synthetic, the towels, which is used extensively in the medical systems, because that kind of a texture will hold a little amount of bacteria. And some of the structures of the organisms also inspire you to make large number of the larger buildings which follow the perfect dynamic model. So bio-inspiration is something which actually carry forward a lot of ideas in future. Biomimicry or biomimetics is a field which is in India is at its infancy. A lot of things to do, and also educate the younger students about the oceans, their importance, and they are definitely inspired, because in the last several decades we have seen the excitement of the students when they say a living organism in front of them, and when they handle an organism. So take them, when you take them to the forest, take them to the shallow waters, shallow rocky area also. See what is there in the ocean. And then we need to have larger platforms like the Oceanarium, where the students will ultimately see the marine life directly. And that, of course, kindle a lot of interest in their mind. And they may be the future marine biologists of the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. Wow, what a presentation it was. Anyway, those who have any question, they can come to the chat box and ask the question, so sir can answer it. I think that's better instead of all of us are coming into uh, uh, the mic. So can you see the questions there?
Yeah.
Okay. Probably we can take 10 minutes here.
Yeah, quite a lot of questions, but let me see what are the most relevant ones. Yeah, one question is, what are artificial reefs? Are they good for reviving marine life? Well, artificial reefs are actually the structures, primarily the concrete structures made, which are actually put in the ocean. The issue is that they will not actually replace the natural reef, but the importance of artificial reefs are basically done for two purposes. One is actually to protect a particular area from the action of the wave, and second is actually this is an area which ultimately help in the long run for organism to settle, and which ultimately will serve as a ideal feeding ground and breeding ground for the marine organisms. So if nothing is there, definitely artificial reefs will help. But unfortunately, what is happening in many of the areas, including in many of the maritime states in India, is that when you put artificial reefs in large numbers or larger extent, they will serve as an ideal uh, hiding ground for fishes and other organisms like squids. So this will promote indirectly overexploitation of the species. So that it is a double-edged sword. On one side, it helps in protecting the biodiversity and giving more space for the organism to settle as well as take shelter. But those who are actually aware of the artificial reefs, they definitely use it as an ideal place for overexploitation of the species. So artificial reefs are good in the sense that they are providing a habitat for the organisms. If judiciously used, sustainably used, definitely they will help. Okay, I think that cleared the doubt. Hope you can give us a little about sea cucumber trade. Okay, sea cucumber is now currently in the Schedule 1 of Wildlife Protection Act. Sea cucumber trade was actually banned in India primarily because they are collected in large numbers, specifically from the coral reef ecosystems, and they are exported. And they are exported for making some kind of the byproducts like beached meat. And because of overexploitation, their numbers, especially for the larger species like Holothuria, etc., they are all coming down. And this is happening even now, because every month we will get reports of the sea cucumber catch from Tamil Nadu. Some part of last month I heard it from Lakshadweep also. It is collected by a researcher from the Lakshadweep, and it is exported for thousands of rupees. So this is happening. So now the sea cucumber trade is actually regulated. But unfortunately, in many of the areas, even actually this should be managed by the forest department and the forest department staff. But they should be also aware of the importance of coral sea cucumber, and they are actually a tradable commodity, and then it should be actually regulated. But just like the wildlife trade happening in many parts of India, the people should actually involve, the community should involve. They should inform the forest department. They should inform the police about the sea cucumber trade. There are something else also happening even now in India, despite the fact that these animals are in the Schedule 1 of Wildlife Protection Act. For example, seahorses. Seahorses are also collected in large numbers, traded through the illegal ways, and corals, especially hard corals. They are very rare, critically in danger. They are also collected. So the civil society organizations, the local communities, and the public should actually inform the departments well in advance about this kind of illegal activities happening. Remember that these organisms are also in the Wildlife Protection Act of India, along with the tiger and lion. Okay, coral restoration programs in India. Yes, there are coral restoration programs happening in few parts of India, particularly in Andamans now, and Lakshadweep they have started. In Goan, in Malvan area, they have started. In Gulf of Mannar, one island is actually now drowning, and in order to protect that, they have now coral restoration program. Coral restoration program is one of the essential thing to restore the health of the coral reef ecosystem. Because once an area is affected or impacted by some way or other, coral restoration is the only way to restore that area back. Even though we will not get the same kind of diversity back, but it is better than nothing in the area. Okay. Artificial reefs I have already said. Many of them are asking about the coral reef restoration in different areas. Okay, these are all the major questions.
Sir, if you're done with the question answer session.
Yeah, because another question. I have time for still time.
Yeah, five more minutes we can take. It's okay.
Yeah, and another question is that another question is that how does biomimicry help in conservation of biodiversity? See, biomimicry has nothing to do with the conservation of biodiversity. Biomimicry is something actually a researcher can do, taking inspiration from the living organisms. For example, sometimes the inspiration may be the structure of the organism, their design. Sometimes it may be a novel molecule which actually help them in developing certain kind of products out of that. So this is actually the benefit, a service derived out of the biodiversity. So we can say it is actually a service rather than conservation. But conservation, they have a role. For example, if you have an organism with unknown function, when I find morning, you realize that it has a very peculiar role because of this chemical. Then ultimately you can conserve that species because that's very rare. So sometimes a value tag added to that species may give it considerable importance. So in that way, indirectly, it may have a conservation value. Okay, another question by Saurav Paul is that since biodiversity is hardly explored, yet how you see marine aquaculture threats? Well, both the freshwater and marine aquaculture has its own implications, because aquaculture is an artificial system. Any artificial system within a natural system will have its own indirect impacts, and it's all relatively well studied in many of the Western waters. For example, the oyster farm. Oyster farm, the issue is that since you are actually conducting the aquaculture in a shallow water body, when the which is not that much exposed to this kind of water current, normally that area will have more eutrophication, and that area will have more harmful algal bloom, etc. So this kind of a negative impact will always be there. So next is that when you cultivate larger number of organisms together in an aquaculture system, for example, in an open, in a larger cage, normally the chances of diseases are more. So you need to apply antibiotics and some kind of chemicals in the system. So that will indirectly pollute the system. Then in intensive farming operations, you have to give food for the organisms. Since the food is given in water, major part of the food is wasted. They also settle in the bottom, change the bottom chemistry, and change the quality of water. So these are the things which happen. Coral transplantation, a lot of questions are there. Coral transplantation, see, when the corals are highly degraded, you have no other option but to go for a transplantation. But the issue is that transplantation has begun in India only in the recent past. So we need to do a lot of research on the way in which we do the transplantation, the long-term implication of the transplantation, as well as the positive benefits derived out of coral transplantation. So since we are in the beginning stage, there are a lot of other examples in different parts of the world, but we have to again get these experiences, and then only we can improve the whole way in which we are doing the coral transplantation, because it's very expensive affair. You cannot do it everywhere every time. So you need to be sustainable as well. So a lot of things should actually come up through the formal research. Yeah, this is question by Karupasamy. Is there any conservation program for elasmobranchs in the west coast of India? See, the elasmobranchs, just like any other carnivorous animal, this is a long living, late maturing, and less fecund. That means reproductive capacity is also very less. So that means we should have a very stronger conservation program for the elasmobranchs. At present, there is no specific conservation plan, but the Indian government has actually banned the export of shark fin from India. So ultimately, in the long run, that will help in conservation of the shark. And many of the sharks and rays in India are in the red list, and these are one group of organisms definitely to be preserved. But as such, some of them are in the Schedule 1 of Wildlife Protection Act as well. But besides that, there is no specific project for the conservation of elasmobranchs. Okay. Thank you all for the nice questions, and many questions are repetitive, and I think you enjoyed my lecture. Thank you so much for your
right.
patience.
I just take 2 minutes, 1 minute in fact. First of all, thank you so much. First time I'm listening to a wonderful talk on seas and our marine life. Thanks from all of us, who's listening. I think there was over 220 people who were listening to you, sir. It was wonderful, and so much of information what we got. I mean, I think we all going to explore a bit of sea and try to learn whatever way we can. And it's also from Kottayam Nature Society and Alapura Natural History Society. We are extending our thanks to you. And also those who are listening, we'll be conducting more and more talks. Tomorrow there will be a talk on orchids of Western Ghats. Then there will be on turtles, on tortoise of India, and other talks are coming up. Please keep a watch out. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day, and stay safe and stay healthy.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Bye.